Hello, my name is Drew, and I like to make things out of clay. Today's video is not for the faint of heart. Let's just say if you're squeamish, you might want to skip this video because, well, it could cut deep. In this video, I'll be making a knife out of Sculpey. Well, not exactly a knife. I'll be making a handle and sheath for a butter knife, but it's still gonna look super cool. This video is dedicated to my niece and nephews, who told me that I need to make a 5 Nights at Freddy's video because it's way too popular to ignore. Let's just take a stab at it. I started with a sketch, as it makes the process a lot easier when you have something to follow. Now, in the video game, William, an owner of a pizza restaurant, lures 5 kids into a back room where he murders them. I don't think the weapon was ever really disclosed, but it seems like the consensus is that he stabbed them to death and then put their bodies in some animatronic mascots. Since I will be using this butter knife as an internal portion, I don't need to use tin foil or armature wire. I hack a few chunks, roll them into balls, and roughly measure them against my drawing. My intention is to start the Freddy character on its side so that it's easier to work with. Then when it's pretty much done, I'll adjust his head to make it more suitable for holding the handle. I still don't have any professional tools, but don't feel bad for me. I'm using some old water pick attachments and they're doing an adequate job. I could roll a few balls for eyes, but since I have an assortment of beads laying around, I'd rather use them, as they hold their shape when I'm squishing and shaping Freddy's head. His hat is very simple. It just requires a few balls that get squished and then placed on top of each other, followed by a more cylindrical top. Now Freddy has some good old buck teeth, so I'll roll out a long piece, flatten it, and chop it up like a 5-star Michelin chef. If I'm gonna have them keep their shape, I'm going to need to get out my trusty heat gun to firm them up a bit. I jam those tiny chiclets into his mouth, then roll out another ball which gets pressed for his lower jaw before more teeth get added. I should perhaps remind my new viewers that I'm not a professional sculpture guy. Matter of fact, this is my 4th time making anything of decency. You can check out my first video to learn a little about my skill set. I only say this because if you're interested in making something yourself, it's doable. It just takes time and patience. Back to Freddy's head. I create a couple ears that I poke into the sides of his head using a couple pieces of wire. His eyelids get defined, almost comically since he is supposed to be an animatronic bear after all. Now that I am sort of liking how his head looks, I start wrapping the butter knife handle in a thin layer of Sculpey. I decide to have his head protrude past the end, as I mentioned earlier, because I want it to act as a stopper, so to speak, for my hand. His torso required a little modification because I wanted it to be comfortable when being held, so it had to be thin, but still look like his body. I created a waist and then defined his legs by essentially just pressing my tool down the middle so that they would stay together. I made a few adjustments to his hat, as the first version was a little too big. I also built up his forehead before using my picking tool to create joints in his arms and legs. Now that his head is high enough, I can scalp the poor bugger so that his hat sits right on top. Now, for the texture, I've decided to create a fur-like texture and did this by making the little V's all over his face, arms, and legs. I really like the way it turned out and gave it a coating of rubbing alcohol to remove the little turds and crumbs that built up along the way. Now it's into the oven at 275 for 20 minutes. While Freddy cures, I'll start on the sheath by rolling out a thin flat piece of clay and then pressing the blade into it so that I know the approximate size. I use my handy homemade paper clip in a screwdriver tool to scoop out the part where the blade goes. Then I use my heat gun to firm up that piece before rolling out another piece and tracing this one on top of it. I roll a thin rolly piece and trace the outside of the sheath to add a little more space for the blade. Now a little Sculpey adhesive will join the two pieces together and it's ready for some sanding. With the edges smooth, I add some scratches to give it the appearance of leather, and then add some small tiny bits for stitching. With that done, I stick it in the oven, and it's airbrushing time! I've decided to keep this paint job simple, so I'm going to make Golden Freddy look like a 24-karat murderous blob of goodness. I mix a little water with my paint and use my dropper to fill up the containment part of the sprayer doodad. I'm getting a little better with this machine, but it still takes forever to coat my creations. I use my heat gun between sprays to help speed up the drying process. The reason I use the airbrush rather than a paintbrush is because a paintbrush would most likely cover up a lot of my tiny details, and I really want the fur to pop. With each golden layer, Freddy looks more amazing in my opinion, and the happier I am with the decision to keep him all gold. Okay, now that he's shimmering, I'll work on the leather sheath. I start by coating this pinkish slice of bacon with a watered down diarrhea brown. Hey, that rhymes. Watered down, diarrhea brown. Copyrighted. Then, after a number of coats, I use a regular paintbrush to paint the stitches black with a hint of gold. I then try a little dry brushing and add some variations for the leather, and with that, Freddy's murder weapon is complete. Wait, no, this knife couldn't cut jello, which means it's time for some grinding! Woo, that puppy's sharp. Let's move on to the photo shoot. Thanks for watching my video. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss next week's video. It's gonna be a beast.